I just want to start by welcoming everybody to the Primero Global Meeting 23. We've been doing this for a long time. Every year we have some type of global event where we bring people together from different parts of the world, representing different work streams that we're involved in. This is a very exciting one because we're in the East Asia Pacific region. This is a region that has been very important to the work over the years, a real sort of trailblazing region where we have lots of exciting partnerships and lots of exciting work that's happening. My name is Robert MacTavish. I'm the lead for the Primero initiative. And I want to start by saying huge thanks to the team here who helped pull this together for us. It's very difficult when you're setting up a meeting in a different part of the world. You end up depending a lot on your colleagues and your partners to take care of a lot of things for us. So thanks very much to the organizers. Thanks very much to Mohan for pulling the Primero team's weight here. And thanks to the APRO, to the regional office as well. Let's get underway. I'm going to introduce a few people shortly, but what I wanted to do is just set the stage for the meeting today. We have an introductory session that's being broadcast. This is a live webinar, so we're being joined by people who are awake. You know, many people are not awake right now, and hopefully they'll be watching this later because it's being recorded. So with that, I'm informing everybody that these events are being recorded. This morning's event is being recorded. Some of the later sessions, it will just be those of us in the room. The next thing I wanted to say is that we have 3 different thematics over the next few days that we're going to talk about, and they draw upon a very diverse set of skills and experiences. Some of it's very techie. Some of it's very focused on child rights and programming, and there's an element that's very operational and planning oriented. And so we divide our time in those 3 different sort of pillars in 3 separate days. It's very important that you bring your skills and experience to bear in this conversation. You are the Primero community, and the success of the work that we do depends on your engagement, your experience, and your ideas. We're going to kick this meeting off by intuition. Intuition is not helping me. Second slide. We're going to hear some opening remarks from Tasha Gill. Now, Tasha Gill is, many of you probably know her. She is going to give us opening remarks as the OIC for the Director of Child Protection for UNICEF globally. So let's play those opening remarks.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this year's Primero Global Meeting. I'm Tasha Gill, standing in today for Shima Sen-Gupta, our Global Director for Child Protection, who apologizes that she can't be with you in person for this meeting. The Primero community is an incredible group of organizations and professionals, and I wish I could be there with you to kick off this event in Bangkok and share experiences and ideas. Nevertheless, here I am to open the meeting and encourage you to make the most of your time together. I am very excited and energized by the work that you're all doing. Child protection has long needed stronger and more compelling data. The demand for data is everywhere, and it can be a truly powerful tool for us. We know that our child protection and gender-based violence work is sensitive, and so are the data that we collect. We know we must remain vigilant about the security and confidentiality risks. Behind all that data are real children, their fears, their vulnerabilities, their families, their future. It is our duty to protect it. And what I like most about Primero is that it represents a community of like-minded, highly principled actors who understand that to make lasting change in women and children's lives, we have to work together and support each other. And that we can do this and still be confident we are doing our part to ensure that their data is kept safe and used appropriately. I also see how Primero helps to bring together different actors in the protection space. social workers working both in the humanitarian and development fields, including those working for non-governmental organizations and governments, actors working in child protection and gender-based violence, colleagues working on data and information management systems, as well as technologists at the global, regional, and national levels. It really is quite inspiring. We all know that our work is much more impactful when we are working together in a well-coordinated network. And even though I'm not in the room with you, I have seen the participant list, and I know what a diverse and remarkable group of people are attending the global meeting this year. And this idea of an integrated system of actors and processes is the most effective way forward for sustainable impact at scale. It is the model that we know works best. We've seen a lot of success delivering this kind of integrated system at scale. We've seen how putting the right tools in the hands of a well-supported social services workforce can really make an important impact on the lives of children and survivors of violence. We are seeing this happening in places like Cambodia, Ghana, Guatemala, and Iraq. In my time as the Senior Advisor for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, I've seen the impacts that Primero can have at convening partners and aligning them towards a common cause. In Iraq, the CPMS Plus was rolled out to support an emergency response in the northern Kurdish region of the country. And within a few months, 100 frontline workers from half a dozen organizations were actively using Primero in their day-to-day work. And that number continues to climb. And now, a few years on, that same CPMS Plus implementation has been scaled across the country and is serving as the main digital case management platform for a huge national workforce, with dozens of organizations and hundreds of frontline workers using it on a daily basis. Primero has been around for a long time. In fact, this year we are celebrating 10 years since its conception. Maybe some of you know it began as a humanitarian initiative. It's now an important tool that helps us bridge humanitarian development nexus. In many places, Primero has been introduced in emergencies and then evolved and taken over by government partners in the development post-emergency phase. For other countries, it was implemented as part of their development strategy, and we've seen it rapidly adapted to deal with surges of cases when emergency strikes. In all those, we know that programming is the central piece, and that we have to make sure that we are investing in the workforce. A secure, shared information management system like Primero can act as the glue between different organizations and teams in such challenging situations. We all have stories of how Primero has helped to make a significant difference in the lives of one child, one survivor. That's what brings us together. Again, I'm sorry I can't be with you. We've come a long way together. I hope this meeting will help to strengthen and energize the Primero community. I hope it will help you share ideas and experiences and come together to plan for the coming years. And above all, I hope it will reinforce our commitment to protection and the lives of the most vulnerable women and children in the world today. Thank you.
Let's give Tasha Gill a virtual clap. She really came through for us. Tasha's been a great supporter of the work for a long time, and we're really grateful that she would do that for us. It's excellent examples. I know we're picking just a handful of examples, and many of you in the room have interesting experiences to share. What we're going to talk about now is the objectives for our 3 days together. Then I'm going to go into a little bit of a Primero review of the past year so that we have some context for this. But the first and most important thing, the most important objective that we have is to learn from each other, share experiences, meet others in the community. And this is fun. I hope you have fun. But what's more important about that is that many of you are doing very similar things. You're facing similar challenges, and this is an opportunity to come together, share experiences, and learn from each other. The same community sets the agenda. So I want to be very clear. This meeting is an impactful meeting. Every year when we have this meeting, we literally set the agenda for the coming year based on the way that the community is prioritizing our work. So be active in that conversation. The second part of this is a very specific focus for this year's meeting, which is the work that we're doing to develop and mature our strategy for strengthening national systems and for supporting governments. As you heard Tasha say, we started off working much more in humanitarian response. And in humanitarian response, the engagement with the government is different. Now, what I'm going to show you in my opening slides is how much that's changed over the years and how much this work is now being driven by the development strategies, by the child protection strategies of national governments. We need to continue to improve our game plan for that. The third piece is to develop understanding of Primero as a DPG. So you'll hear me say this a lot, as a digital public good. What does that mean? What is a digital public good? It's not just a catchphrase. It's a meaningful part of our strategy. And we make a lot of decisions based on this qualification. The fourth is to build capacity to implement, evolve, support, and maintain and sustain Primero. And that's both technical capacity and people like yourselves, but it's also the capacity at the field level. So strengthening the social services workforce. And the final one here is highlighting and mainstreaming the new programmatic and operational frameworks that we would like to standardize, or we would like to use Primero as a vehicle to push these forward. Again, we're going to have several examples of that. We're going to hear from different teams and different programs today, and really, I'd like to highlight some of this in our planning for the coming year as well. So I'm going to jump into this webinar that we call the Year in Review. We've been doing this for a few years now. This will sort of give us some context for the conversation over the coming days. So I'll give this brief presentation, and then I'm going to call up a panel of expert colleagues that are going to answer some questions about these things. We're going to then carry on with day one, which is focused on programming and partnerships, and we're going to hear from a variety of you about the very different and very interesting programs that you're supporting with Primero. And the second day, we're going to focus more on the product itself. Product and services is the second day of the agenda. You should have the agenda on a QR code right in front of you. In case any of you haven't been able to connect to the internet, you can do that. You don't need a special code. You can just do that with your own email device. And on the third day, we're going to look at the planning for the coming year. We have some exercises. We intend for this to be very interactive. We want you to be up and moving around the room and working with each other. That's our strategy. That's the way that we get the best result out of this meeting. So I'm going to kick off with some information from the past year, just some from the global level, some of the insights, some of the changes that we've seen over the year. So the first thing I think is important to acknowledge is that the context is changing. The context for children is changing. And we see this happening all around us, but we're at the midpoint now of the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, and all indicators show that even specifically to the child protection SDGs, that we're not on track. In fact, we're very far behind on many of those. And if your organization is monitoring this, if your organization is tracking your work based on this, you'll have heard the sort of alarming statements around this. So if we really do want to accelerate to 2030 and achieve the SDGs, we need every tool in the toolbox. And digital transformation is definitely a part of that. The second element here that I wanted to call out was specifically on the indicators related to violence against children. These are not particularly optimistic indicators. So I'm just going to read a couple of them here for you. About 15 million adolescent girls between the ages of 15 and 19 have experienced forced sex in their lifetime. About 10% of the world's children are not legally protected from corporal punishment. Over 1 in 3 students aged 13 to 15 experience bullying. Approximately 1 in 4 children between the ages of 5 or under the age of 5, about 176 million, live with a mother who's a victim of intimate partner violence, and roughly 1 in 3 or 3 in 4 children between the ages of 2 and 4, around 300 million, are regularly subjected to violent discipline. So protection is and violence against children are very, very relevant issues. And the message that I want to share with everyone is that we see better results when we're working together. Protection is is something that requires partnership and collaboration. And as a sector, everything that we can do to work better in a more coordinated manner is what we should be discussing here today. We've got issues like climate change, migration and displacement, armed conflict disproportionately affecting children, and online safety as well as an issue. The final point there about cybersecurity I included because there have been a couple of really important reports over the last year that indicate that humanitarian and development actors are one of the top targets for cyber threats. So the idea that we're not vulnerable to information security and data security threats is certainly not true. And we have to kind of increase our focus on data security and do that as collectively as a sector. Moving into our key performance indicators. So we like to show this little dashboard. This is the part where all of the work is sort of summarized into one visual. Importantly here, we like to track how we are scaling. And when we talk about scale, most of the time, what people are asking is, how many countries do you work in? And that statement in itself indicates a very skewed idea about what we're trying to do. Because if the goal is to get that number 56 to go up, that in of itself doesn't mean a result. That's not a result for us. What is meaningful is what's happening in those 56 countries. What kind of programs are we supporting? How are those programs performing? Is the application adding value to those programs? So I want to talk a little bit more about that. And that little gauge that you see with the 291, that is us tracking our total lifetime accumulated caseload versus the cases that are currently open. So you can see there that we're close to over 1.5 million cases that have been managed in Primero, and right now just under 200,000 of those remain open and active. This is an indicator that we track because we don't want to see that gauge go too far to the right. That's an indication that cases aren't being closed and that case management is not fulfilling its objective, which is to address the risks and vulnerabilities faced by children. We're at about 11,000 users right now, and I'm going to show you some data on how that's changed, along with 1.5 million cases, like I said. In the second and third day, when we talk about planning, we're going to talk about how our product is supported and how our product is viewed in the world. So the support element's very important, and you'll see there that there are some indications about the traffic that we receive to some of our sites. It is really incredible how much our support hub and our YouTube channel are being used, more than we ever expected. Many, many thousands of visits every month, many, many thousands of minutes watched every month. That indicates to me that there's a workforce that depends on these tools, and those tools are things that we're developing collaboratively. So moving on from this, I wanted to just talk a little bit about live implementations and our insights that we're gathering from this. Now, this seems like a nice steady climb. Right now, we have 66 live implementations, and that's only up from 63 last year, which is a small increase. But what I'm going to keep talking about over the course of the next few days is how much this trajectory is changing based on the work with governments. When we work with governments to implement Primero at a national scale, it takes longer. It takes longer, and there are more resources implied. There's a longer period of time from when we initiate the conversation until we're actually adding active users to those implementations. So that is part of a dynamic that we're seeing increasingly, especially over the last 2 years, since COVID, especially. The other piece that's interesting here is that it's only increasing by 3 is a minor increase, but there's a good story behind that. Several of these implementations have decided to merge together. So when we had multiple implementations in one country, the partners decided, you're using it and we're using it, why don't we use it together? And that's a really exciting story. That means that child protection actors in the space are deciding that they trust this system to manage the data for them. and they prefer to do it together. That's when we see the best results. When all the actors are using the same system, that's when we see the really important resilience and the programming outcomes. So a modest increase of 5%. But I also wanted to mention that we have 10 ongoing implementations right now. So with a relatively small team, we have 10 deployed instances, and several of you are in the room here today. We have Panama here, we have Mexico here. I know that there are several other ongoing implementations. Our process now is much more upstream. The notion of the upstream work is really important. We're modeling Primero after national legislative and normative frameworks, and it's becoming much more of a national system strengthening intervention. In terms of users, again, a pretty significant increase here. If you think about that, each one of these users is not using Primero from time to time, but it's a daily usage that they're using the product for. They're depending on it for a number of different parts of their work, but increasingly supervision, referrals, all of those statistics have gone up. So this is an increase now that we're looking at of about a third just in 1 year. So we haven't quite hit a curve on that, but the next piece of information I think is probably the most exciting. In that small number of increased implementations, and in that number of users, we see a dramatic increase in the caseload. And this can be both very exciting and very alarming, because when there's a sudden surge in the caseload, we have to think, is there enough capacity to provide services for this caseload? In this case, what we're seeing is all of that growth is happening in places that have existing implementations. So this is where the governments are having really important impact for scale, not scaling to new countries, but the government saying, we want to expand out of this region into more regions of the country and bringing in more actors within their own networks. This is the dynamic that we're seeing that we're very excited about, where we think that the real impact is happening. So that's a pretty dramatic increase of over 300% in cases. And we've been tracking it very carefully, because we do want to make sure that ratio of caseworker to case is correct and that cases continue to be closed. The next point I wanted to share is just a bit of analysis further on that government's driving scale. In the past, this was the job of a handful of a small team from a handful of organizations, the steering committee for the CPIMS or the Primero Coordination Committee. Now, increasingly, it's us responding to governments that are driving up the scale. So just in a few years, the average of our total number of implementations, users per implementation, was around 60 to 1. A normal implementation was somewhere around 60 users. That number has gone up to over 160. And for me, that's a pretty dramatic increase. If you think about what a training looks like, so in this room, maybe we have 70 people right now. That many social workers all working together on a common high integrity caseload is a pretty impactful change. And what we're seeing now is governments are saying, we want to scale this faster, starting in one part of the country and expanding. Jordan's a perfect example of this. Iraq, the one that Tasha described. We have Cambodia here. A lot of those follow that same pattern. Once it's seen to be working and delivering value, the government wants to accelerate the scale. And that is a tremendous responsibility for us. And it's also a different way of working. It's much less about a small group of organizations driving that scale and responding to the needs of the government, especially in a time where children are facing a whole range of protection issues. I'm going to jump quickly into the business model and the way that we present Primero as a digital public good. It's relevant for everyone here because it's vital for sustainability of our product, but it's also about things like community, pricing, our financial sustainability. I would really encourage you, and the link is in the bottom of the document here, But we had a very interesting case study done on Primero by UNDP this year, specifically on digital public goods and their role in helping accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. To summarize, the important point here is that we are doing a much better job when we call Primero a digital public good, and when we're true to the notion of a digital public good, at convincing governments that this is the way to go. This is the way to go, not investing in your own software, not trying to develop something from scratch. By joining a community behind a digital public good, there are a whole series of other benefits that come from global initiatives. You'll hear me talk about digital public infrastructure. Some of the conversation that we'll have with the panel today is on that as well. Governments are responding to this because it meets their needs. They don't want to have a bunch of siloed systems with dependencies on vendors. They want to have integrated national systems. So this particular case study is interesting because it looks at the Primero business model and the community development model that we've taken, which you're all a part of. I'd encourage you to read it. And I wanted to say that we can successfully report that the business model that we launched in this global meeting a few years ago, this year for the first time, is going to cover 100% of the operating costs of the Primero technology. So we are on track to be a fully self-sustaining digital public good by 2025. I do want to emphasize here that Primero is more than just a tool. It's obviously a data system. We obviously emphasize the primacy of programming. Primero cannot sit with a child and assess the child and plan that child's intervention. But it is more than just a tool. It is about a programming approach that strengthens partnerships. And we saw this through COVID. And now with COVID behind us and looking at that, we saw how organizations that were connected by a common digital platform were resilient. They kept delivering services when other organizations were basically disconnected from their clients. That's a clear example that we have. A driver for standards. So we're going to hear from some people about things like the child functioning module for disability classification, and the new violence against children indicators. Primero can be a vehicle for mainstreaming those globally. A model for better service delivery. So we know about integrated service delivery and how important that is. This year, I'm going to propose, and hopefully we'll find some funding for it. There are multiple research tracks that we want to pursue on this. The vehicle for better service delivery and more accountable service delivery. It's also an engine for data and insights, and I'm sure some of you are going to have some clever ideas about AI and machine learning and all of that, because that's always on the agenda these days. And a foundation to build upon and extend upon. And we're going to hear from some colleagues who are developing new modules of Primero, new use cases for Primero. So over the next 3 days, we're going to spend a day talking about programs and partnerships. We're going to hear from a variety of you about very different programs that are being supported. We're going to talk about products and services. So this gets a little bit techy. We'll talk about some integrations, interoperability, our support model, how we do release management, things like that. And then the final day, we'll talk about planning the shared future that we have. And this is when it gets very interesting. And I want to be very clear with everybody. I have a few examples that I want to share with you about this. So in this meeting, this community, if we go back a few years, in 2017, the same meeting, people came together and they said, you know what we really need? We need full internationalization. And that means that people that are using Primero can use it in the language that's most comfortable to them. The following year, we introduced an internationalization strategy, and now we're in 26 languages. That started in a Primero Global meeting. In 2018, we realized that the Android application we're using in places where they didn't have good internet connectivity was causing a lot of problems, and people wanted a different solution. That was a priority that we agreed upon in the global meeting. The following year, we had a design for a progressive web application that works online and offline that is pretty globally scaled at this point. That came out of a global meeting. And that list of impactful decisions and prioritizations goes on and on. Every year, this meeting has helped us drive consensus around key priorities for the following year. And every year, that's been a game changer for us. That really is the community that's been driving this change. So I want you to be clear about that. This meeting matters. At the end of this meeting, we will have some very clear ideas about what we're going to do next year and the year after that. So what I would like to do now, and I think we still have a good amount of time. So I am going to ask our panelists to come up, and we're going to have a guided discussion, a panel discussion. We have some questions that we've already received from some of you and from the field, and we'll talk through those first, and then we'll open up to the floor and hear any questions that you have for the panelists yourselves. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is to ask Rachel Harvey, who is our regional director our regional advisor for child protection in East Asia Pacific, to come and take a seat. Welcome, Rachel. Next, I'll ask Steve Miller, who is the Global Director of Child Protection at Save the Children International, come up and take a seat. Thanks for joining us, Steve. And finally, Karim Ghalaini is the Regional Chief of ICTD and Digital Innovation for UNICEF's East Asia Pacific region. Karim, come on up and take a seat. Let me give you guys this microphone. Okay, so I get to be a talk show host now. First of all, thank you very much for joining. I know you're very busy people, and we have a number of quite interesting questions. We've talked through these a little bit so that we know exactly, where they're coming from and sort of, the impetus behind them. But I'm going to start with you, Rachel, and this is from a question from our colleague Ibrahim in Nigeria, who you're very familiar with, I'm sure. And Ibrahim cuts right to the chase. We were talking about the importance of the role of government in this, and Ibrahim's question was, since governments bear the primary responsibility for protection of children in line with their international and national commitments, how are you working in this region to ensure that CPIMS is embedded in system strengthening work and that it's sustainable?
Thanks very much,
an easy one.
Rob, and thanks, Ibrahim. Yeah, Nigeria is very close to my heart. I worked there for a number of years, and it's really nice to see everyone here in Bangkok. You're very welcome. So this one, I would say, in this region, we're primarily working in development context with the introduction of Primero. And I would say that embedding is absolutely the key word for us. We all know that child protection information management systems don't sit in a vacuum. They don't sit in isolation. They're a really important part of social service workforce strengthening, and they promote effectiveness, efficiency of the system. But they also help us to monitor effectiveness, potentially can help us monitor the impact of investment in the system. And so for us here, it's really a key pillar of child protection system strengthening. And what really also helped us embed is in 2021, I hope you all know that UNICEF released the benchmarking framework on maturity of systems. And I think that this was really important because it didn't only set out the domains of the child protection system, but it gave us a framework for saying when we've reached maturity as well. So what we're looking to achieve. And within that, child protection information management systems are directly related to a number of the domains, including on case management and data collection and systems, and also feeds into the domains on coordination, mechanisms, and informed policy dialogue and program development. We see from that framework the maturity is achieved when a formal child protection case management and referral system is fully implemented, that it's integrated through national case information management systems, where also administrative data is part of this broader national statistical system. It's inclusive and where data is actually used. But of course, maturity of the system can't just be achieved through CPIMS. We know that the other domains must progress. They've got to progress in parallel, especially social service workforce. So CPIMS needs to be integrated, embedded into dialogue, planning and visioning for the child protection system, and in particular, social service workforce strengthening as well. So what have we done in this region? So at regional level, we have a body called ASEAN. It's made up of 10 Southeast Asian member states. And social service workforce strengthening has become a priority. And we've managed to develop a declaration and a roadmap on social service workforce strengthening. And in that, it was really important to us that CPIMS was a pillar, was a key priority. And within that, Primero is actually cited as a good example for ASEAN member states as well. And this has provided some weight for advocacy for our colleagues at national level to work with government to introduce CPIMS as well. At national level, we've been piloting visioning of child protection systems. So getting multi-sectoral players together, government and NGOs, to think about in 20 years' time, what should the child protection system look like? What should it deliver? How? Both government and non-governmental organizational delivery of that system. And within that, then, how do we build in CPIMS to that long-term vision? What role should it play? How should it be delivered? In addition, as you said, it's about government ownership for sustainability. So in this region, we have CPIMS in 7 countries, in Cambodia, Indonesia, Myanmar, PNG, Philippines, Thailand, and Timor-Leste. Really different contexts, really different capacities and resources. And in all implementations of Primero, apart from Myanmar, it's government-led, government-owned from the conception phase. They make all the decisions in all stages of the rollout. It's based on their national case management protocols and systems, their policies, their referral pathways, and knowledge transfer is embedded into the implementation plan. And in some countries, managed to integrate CPIMS Primero into the in-service training for key workers in the system. In addition, we found that Primero is a key opportunity for strengthening the system as well. I'm sure you've all found this as well. For case management, for coordination, for policy and planning. So in the Philippines, we found a fragmentation between the bureaus of Department for Social Welfare and Development. And the coordination mechanism for Primero managed to bring all those departments together so that they were better coordinated across districts, provinces, and nationally as well. In Thailand, I'm sure we hear from colleagues, the linkage between health and child protection was also strengthened through the introduction of CPIMS. In Timor, it led to a review and revision of the case management protocols, and a new data protection and information sharing protocol was also adopted. And in Cambodia, and I know you'll hear from colleagues in Cambodia, the rollout was really an opportunity to connect government and NGOs together. That interoperability was absolutely key, and that's improved referral mechanisms and avoided duplication of services and systems as well. And the National Child Protection Monitoring System has also helped policy dialogue, policy development as well. So just to conclude, we're also looking to the future of child protection systems, and I'm sure for all of us a challenge is climate change. So what does it mean to have a climate resilient child protection system? And for us, the CPIMS and the ability of the CPIMS to help target hotspots, to help show the impact of climate change on vulnerabilities around child protection, I think is going to be really key. So I think CPIMS for us is also part of the future of child protection systems.
Fantastic response. So many good bits in there. For me, the benchmarking piece is really critical. We're going to have dedicated time together on that on the 3rd day. But what I like so much about that piece of work is that in some contexts where you want to have this upstream engagement, there's too much emphasis put on the digital system. And that almost takes attention away from the investment in the workforce and investment in capacity. And in other contexts, there's no emphasis put on secure data management. What the benchmarking does is, as you say, allows us to have a roadmap to advance those things in parallel, in tandem, understanding that they're all key components to a high functioning child protection system. I'm going to ask a question to you now, Steve, if you have a microphone there. This comes from a colleague named Marie in the Philippines, and it's about the social services workforce. So should be your bread and butter here. This is an easy one for you. There's a high turnover, and this is a consistent issue in the social services workforce globally. So what strategies have you been implementing, or are you working on to best support social service organizations and caseworkers? Thank you.
Hello. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Firstly, my name's Steve. So I'm new to your community. I'm really happy to be here. I'm the Global Director for Child Protection at Save the Children, based out of South Africa. And I'm truly privileged to be with you today. I didn't think I was going to be able to make it, and I'm so looking forward to learning from all of you. You know, on the social service workforce, I'm sure it's the same for most of us working in child protection. You know, when we tend to think of individuals, and I think of one person in particular, a friend of mine in a town called Gqeberha in South Africa. And she embodies for me everything that a social worker should be. She brings her absolute whole self to work. She is able to maintain this calm presence despite everything that's going on around her, despite all the challenges that she's facing. And she has this sort of low-level undercurrent of emotion, but she doesn't let it overtake her. And on the negative side, I suppose, there doesn't seem to be any sort of distinction between her personal life and her professional life. The two are almost one. And people like that, and we see them all over the system in government, in civil society, in community-based organizations. They're driven by something else. They have some sort of motivation, internal motivation. It's a calling for them. However, we need to acknowledge the tremendous challenges that the social service workforce faces, not least amongst them your high caseloads, your unequal pay, the fact that skills constantly have to be upgraded, the fact that you feel unheard in many situations. And what that results in is really a strain on the entire system. And we see this tremendous turnover in a lot of the countries in which we work. I think there's two areas where we focus as Save the Children. One is on supervision. So supervision is really strong in our case management approach. And it's important for what I was talking about earlier in terms of burnout for the people working in these situations, but also to encourage learning and development. And the second is on funding, obviously. We have a common approach called Steps to Protect, which I won't talk about now, but I will somehow share with you a link so that you can see, and it's our case management approach to Save the Children. And there we have a really strong call for funding for case management. And we do this in a number of fora around the world that we participate in. So those are just two areas, Robert, where we focus and try to improve things for social service workforce.
Very compelling. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's so true. It's like a vocation, and coming into contact with frontline social services workers, you just feel that passion that they have. And we do need to acknowledge that they need our support and they need our protection as well. I'm going to ask you a question now, Karim, a little bit more on the technical side, because we do have a number of techies with us today. It's very, very versatile and diverse group here. So this question is coming from our colleague Emmanuel in Ethiopia. And the question is, in a country where internet penetration is very low, and this may be because of poor infrastructure, but it also might be due to disruptions like conflict or natural disasters, how can we manage the implementation of Primero, given that it's a web-based app?
All right, thanks, Robert. So many of you don't know me. So my name is Karim. I'm the Regional Chief of IT in this region, the East Asia Pacific region for UNICEF. But my background is network engineering. So designing systems that are resilient and then also that are always available is something that I've been dealing with all of my career. First with the internet service providers, providing internet services to banks. And as you can imagine, if a link goes down for a bank, it's not exactly something that is very relaxing. It's basically needs to be always on. And working for different UN agencies, including UNICEF, then I've had the chance to design systems that have to work in very difficult environments. My experience was at East and Southern Africa. So when it comes to Primero and the availability of that system, so Primero is a digital public good, but it's also part of a digital public infrastructure, which provides essential services to the population and needs to work all the time, including in very difficult connectivity environments, and as well as low connectivity environments, or where the connectivity is not necessarily very reliable. So Primero has been designed as an application that we call a progressive web application, which works on many different platforms as long as you have a standard-based browser, but also PWAs, like we call them, progressive web applications, are designed to work offline. So even if you don't have connectivity, then you as an end user have the ability to enter data and then not necessarily receive the most updated data, but when you do have connectivity, then the most updated data will become available. But when it comes to resiliency and disaster recovery plans in general, then the end application itself is not the only element that has to be taken into consideration. So Primero, in its latest version, has a deployment model that is called T4. And I think that many of you have this type of deployment in your own countries, where it is an example of the Primero team listening to the needs that are specific to government or specific local context, where it will be deployed locally as opposed to being deployed in the cloud. So that allows to basically remove multiple layers of potential failure, where you have the actual back-end system that is closer to where you are as a caseworker, where you need to enter the data. And as a result, then there's the possibility of making sure that you still have the data sovereignty. So basically the data will reside in your own cloud that is locally managed, and then you can meet your own national requirements when it comes to data hosting or data management. Also, there are other multiple aspects to take into consideration. There are a lot of new tech that is available that allows you to have better connectivity. I'm sure that you've all heard of Starlink, which leverages low orbit satellites and then has better connectivity and makes it also more affordable. And there are multiple, all of these different aspects in the whole chain of reliability and connectivity that has to be taken into consideration from the get-go, from the initial planning stages, to make sure that you have resiliency and always available systems.
Thanks for that. There are a couple of things that are interesting to unpack in there. You've probably heard people talking about digital transformation. For me, the relevant piece of that for the child rights agenda is inclusion. And if we're making investments and progress in these digital systems to support child protection, but only some people can access them, then we're substituting one problem for another problem. So thanks for that, Karim. I think the example of disaster recovery is an important one. We know how being separated from your data, being separated from your caseload, that's a real deal breaker for the traditional social worker who carries paper under their arm. So again, two very important elements of digital transformation there. Thank you for that, Karim. We're going to come back to you now, Rachel, and this is from a good friend of yours, I believe. That wasn't intentional. In Senegal, this is from Karen. So back a little bit to the case management side here. Quality, timely, and protected case management data that we get from the CPIMS draws attention to the crucial need for a social service workforce who use case management tools to do their job. So how can we use this CPIMS data to leverage more interest in resources in the social services workforce, and vice versa?
Thanks, and thanks, Karen, for the question. I think, Steve, you said it. Child protection systems are so critically under-resourced, so understaffed. But it's really challenging for all of us to mobilize funding. We haven't been doing a good job at mobilizing resources from government, from public resources, or from the donor space, really, especially where data prevalence is also really limited. And I think that part of the challenge, not the only one, but part of the challenge, that we struggle to demonstrate impact of investment in the system. Especially in a well-functioning, well-resourced system. What is that impact of investment? And I think that the data that CPIMS can give us can demonstrate some key progress, one of which is trust in the system. If we see those cases going up, that's not only an indication of capacity in the system, but also an indication of trust and referral into the social service workforce. It can also show increased effectiveness, especially if you can show closure and timeliness of the cases as well. It can also help show us to our ministers of planning, finance, etc. If you invest X in human resources, this is what you would expect to see in the number of cases that the system can effectively manage. If you build the capacity of X number of social workers, this is the timeliness with which you can see cases being closed. So we can track, with using data from CPIMS, the effectiveness of that investment. And that's a powerful case for public finance resource management. But what's really important then to link internally, link with the ministries, what that data is telling us with the public financing for child protection and social service workforce strengthening. And we don't always do that very well, I don't think. And then in turn, what Karen's asking is the vice versa. How do we demonstrate why CPIMS is also critical to the delivery of quality child protection services? We've got to show how it improves case management, referrals and supervision, making the work of social workers more effective, easier as well. And how we can identify, I think, hotspots where investment, geographical investment, thematic investment is going to be critical. So why CPMS is not just important for effectiveness, but also for targeting of services, of very limited resources, of policy, of programming as well. So I think CPIMS needs to be integrated in our public financing work. Our social policy colleagues need to understand the importance of what CPIMS can bring to that dialogue, that discussion as well. I think a key lesson learned from the region, and Mohan, maybe you can speak more later on this, is it's really important to have that discussion with government at the conception phase. And many of you probably have examples of doing that, but we also have examples of doing that later down the line, and how doing it when it's not a conception phase might undermine that use of effectiveness, because it's almost like an afterthought of, okay, how do we actually use that data? And we're not using it as effectively as we can. So I think that's a really key lesson learned. We have to have that discussion right at the beginning. How is data going to be used? How is it going to feed into policy dialogue and discussion, public financing? How can we identify the space for institutionalization of the use of data in the government system, including key data source for relevant national partners as well? So we can't wait until the system is developed, and maybe we need some more guidance around how to embed that into the dialogue from the very beginning. The last point that I want to make is ensuring that government partners understand what the numbers will look like, what success look like. Often for child protection, we want to see a drop in numbers because that equates with a drop in prevalence. But in fact, counterintuitively, that's not what we want for CPIMS. We want to see a rise in numbers as trust increases, as effectiveness increases, as referral increases. And unless our partners understand that that is what we want to see, that is actually a sign of success, sometimes it's a bit of a nasty shock. And that can go against investment in the system. So we just got to be very sure that we're clear on what success looks like for CPIMS.
Great answer. So much to unpack in that. And to your point, like the using the data that we already have, which is a key component of an initiative called Responsible Data for Children, and the Primero Data Challenge that many of you participated in is around using what we already have, data usage. And we have volumes and volumes of data that have really not been properly explored for these reasons that you state. Not only is it a matter of demonstrating the potential value of that intervention, it also sort of demystifies the notion that this is a big, expensive undertaking. It really isn't anymore. The unit cost for implementing is down by 150%. It's as a digital public good and a software as a service, it's a very inexpensive thing to implement, which saves a lot of those budgets for things like capacity building, for bringing better support to the social services workforce further afield and closer to the front lines. I think we have lots of anecdotal evidence for that, but we do need to pull this together into stronger evidence for that cause. And speaking of which, Steve, I know that Save the Children has managed to pull together a pretty cool piece of research and planning for that's coming up. So we might be able to talk about filling some of the gaps in our evidence game. But this next question is specifically around in this space where there are so many competing priorities, how does your organization prioritize digitization as an important part of your overall child protection programming? Make sure that it doesn't sort of fall to the wayside.
Yeah, thanks. And just first, you make such a compelling case. That's wonderful. Well done. Perhaps I could just tell a very quick story on this, on how we approach it. So I'm busy writing an article with our Chief Impact Officer and our head of ethics on artificial intelligence. And we have a very small project, nothing much to speak about, but we're doing it with AWS. And it's essentially going to be able to mine our entire knowledge database and sort of spit out answers that are needed by people in particular contexts. So it's not so much the project. The project is in a pilot phase at the moment. There's a big team working on it in the US. But what we would like to do, is to have a sort of open conversation in the interests of radical transparency on the ethical implications of artificial intelligence in our work. So we're putting it out. It should come out next week, but sort of exploring from algorithmic bias and the Eurocentric focus of our research at the moment to personal information and all sorts of other potential issues, because we see this massive potential for using AI and other digital technology to enhance the work that we do, but we really have to approach it cautiously. We met in Save the Children. Protecting children from digital harm is a key priority of ours now, but it wasn't until quite recently. We met in Sweden in December. We brought together people from all over the movement. It was amazing because, as you know, any sort of federation like ours, there was so much interesting work going on, so many innovative solutions that were being developed in places like Sweden and so on, but it was done in a very ad hoc fashion. And we've sort of brought it all together. We've got an initiative now called the Safe Digital Childhood, and we have work streams within that, a programmatic one focusing on what are the solutions that we can use, you know, in our case management, in the work that we do in the field. We're looking at advocacy, so EU regulation is a big focus of ours at the moment as well. So certainly the digital environment is becoming much more prevalent for us, as it should be. And it's one of the reasons I'm here this week, to learn from many of you at the sort of intersection of tech and child protection. Thank you.
That's great. I'm sure that you're going to get lots of questions as soon as the two letters AI come up in a conversation. Now it opens a huge door for discourse, but thank you for that. We will keep our eyes on that, and let's keep keep me up to speed on that initiative. I'm very interested to see. Okay, because we've taken a bit of a turn to the tech again. Karim, you're in my sights now. This one comes from a beloved colleague in the United States, Pavel Nabutovsky, who happens to be a tech lead for one of the companies that we rely on very much. Pavel, he chose to talk about this report that this important organization called NetHope produced in 2023, called The State of Humanitarian and Development Cybersecurity. So in case you didn't know that such a report existed, this was published this year. And one of the key recommendations that came out of this report was to focus on the basics. So given the diversity of the partners and the places and the implementations where Primero is out in the world, what would you say to this, and how can we meaningfully translate that into our day-to-day practice?
Okay, so thanks, Robert. When you said that the question came from a tech expert, I started to get a little bit nervous. But it seems that the question is actually focused on users, on humans. And when it comes to cybersecurity, like we talk a lot about the technological aspects of it. But cybersecurity, or let's say the security of an information system, is as strong as its weakest link. The weakest link most of the time are humans, and becomes the easiest target to penetrate a system or to gain access to data that is highly sensitive or that should be very secured. So in a world where everything is becoming hyper-connected and we're very dependent on information systems that are out there, that are reside in the cloud or even in local cloud, then the having personal discipline on how we use this system and how we access them becomes extremely important. And this is something that is also often neglected. We always assume that us as individuals, we have all the right reflexes and all the right knowledge in order to safeguard the access to these information systems, and Primero is no exception. So as part of a rollout of a system like Primero, building the capacity of the end users and then planning for it from the beginning as well as part of the rollout and refreshing that knowledge on a regular basis is really crucial. We call this in our own field digital hygiene. And digital hygiene includes, having strong passwords, changing your password on a regular basis, not sharing your account with others, not emailing, like passwords, in clear text, not writing it on a piece of paper and leaving it on your desk. And that sounds, very basic, but these are all things that we're guilty of if we're not really constantly aware of it and we don't, exercise some self-discipline. So I think that the reports like the NetHope one, I think that refers to that when they call it return to the basics. We have a tendency to think that cybersecurity is all about hardened systems and really advanced technology. But most of the time, it is about raising awareness on some of these aspects. A guideline that can be really used also to raise that awareness and then to kind of train ourselves and to take the ownership of that aspects of cybersecurity can be found also in the Responsible Data for Children initiative. Like tools, approaches, principles that need to be applied. And I think that this is a big element, let's say a big part of the answer to that question that you received.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you for plugging Responsible Data for Children for me again. That's an initiative that's very close to my heart. There's only so much, it's true, that we can do with digital tools to really be able to have a high degree of confidence that we're taking every measure possible to keep data secure. If I'm talking to a government partner and I'm saying this system is secure and you can depend on this system, we need to not only be talking about what the digital platform and tools can do, but what we're going to do with the users to ensure that they understand the importance of their own behavior. So we've talked about trust, we've talked about the vocational element of what social work is, sitting in the same space with a young person who's telling you their most private and painful stories. You want to feel very, very confident that you can promise this person that their data, that information is going to be safe. We can't really offer that if we aren't taking the steps to educate and to support the social services workforce in this regard. No, we can't ignore that part of our job. And I think that's something that RD4C does very, very well. And it's a very nice coupling with the work that we do with Primero. So that's where we end our prepared questions. And I'd really like to hear from the folks in the crowd here today. We want to, provoke conversation. We want to hear what's working. We want to hear what's not working, where those gaps are that we can look towards, working together to solve some of these things. So please, I'm opening up to the floor now. Do you have a microphone that we can, if possible, just so that we can get you on camera? I think this mic works here, Mohan. If you have a question, if we could get you to just come up, you can direct it to one of the panel members. And if everybody's feeling shy, then we can also go to the webinar chat. Any questions for our panel today? You have access to some very top-notch expertise here. Take advantage of it. So we have one here, Mr. David Lamon from Sierra Leone.
Good morning, all. It is not so much a question, but to add on Rachel's response to Ibrahim's question about how to institutionalize CPIMS within government. And, I really liked it when Rachel spoke about, bringing training on CPIMS and case management within training programs that have been set up. I think one step to take this further is to institutionalize training on case management and information management within curricula in training institutions, colleges, universities as well. Because one of the problems we have is the huge staff turnover, which requires us to be investing in training all of the time, and it's a lot of funding. But if the training happens within established institutions that have the infrastructure that are set up for training, then social workers are trained from the beginning and they have the skills even before they join the workforce and they start practicing. This way, we shift the burden from us to already established institutions. Thank you.
That's a great insight. Thanks for sharing, David. Anybody have any experience working with curricula that would like to comment on that? Social work curricula?
I think that's a really critical point, because we were talking about in-service training, which is part and parcel of competency-based development and career development. But as you say, pre-service training is absolutely critical. If we can build it into that, we're a step ahead, if you like. And one of the things you also talking about high turnover in this region, retention of social workers is a huge problem. I think although the panel have been talking about what a high intensity job it is, and often not a valued job, especially in this region. I'm sure we're not unique across the globe on that. And so we see a large exit from the social service workforce that then takes with it all the knowledge that they've learned, including the Primero CPIMS training that maybe UNICEF and others have delivered to partners. So that's a huge problem. And so institutionalization, as you say, into pre-service curriculum is critical. I don't have, we work with universities. So that's one. So I think one is to have it in pre-service training. One is, and I think, Steve, you would say more about this, the competency-based training that Save the Children promotes, and having that as part of the competency-based training, identified in certain job roles, identified as people move up the management structure, what they need to know, changes about the CPIMS system and how they use the data. So how we can integrate it. But maybe you could say a bit more about the competency-based training.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, to reflect on recruitment as well, it's again, the people that are coming into the system depends from context to context, are not always well selected, as it were. So from the very beginning, you're sort of in a losing track. We do have a competency-based approach called Compact, which we can share some more details on as well. But I think it's a good way of developing staff once they're in place too. And I think just more generally, I'm just talking about my own organization, we do put a premium on trying to develop staff, to grow them, to give them a pathway through the system, as it were. So we identify top talent, we nurture those talent, and we make sure that they stay with us for as long as possible.
Great question. One quick, we have one over here. Just one quick follow-up to David before I come to you, Dr. Chim. And that we did work with the Global Social Services Workforce Alliance on a piece that was related to this retention element. And the number one, I remember reading, there was a significant number of research on this. One of the top reasons that social workers quit their jobs is administrative paperwork, basically. Too much paperwork. So we have a role to play in addressing that issue. Please, from the corner over here.
Chanvitalatev from Thailand. I think that at this moment the issue of data security is very, very important, and it will be more and more important in future. So the authentication should be one thing that we need to improve to become standard. Let's say at this moment we accept multi-factors authentication or something like that. But this more and more sophisticated authentication would be reverse effect to the organization that we start to implement. We need, simple and easy to access into the system, but the standard become more and more sophisticated. Okay, so how do we balance between, the security issues and the first implementation organization? In Thailand at this moment, we implement into the regional hospital. So we have many users, and we need, more and more sophisticated authentication that should be meet standard. But we would like to implement into the community hospital that need, very easy to access system. So this is contradict. How do we balance between this? Especially in Thailand, we already, integrate the system together. That means community hospital, regional hospital, they utilize and access into the same database, into the same system. How do we balance this? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chambit. That's a very relevant question, and I'm going to take the liberty of directing it toward Karim because he's our technologist. Karim, what do you have to say about the complexity that Dr. Chambit's presented?
All right, thank you for that question. I think it's a very relevant question and something that also we've probably all experienced. At UNICEF about 2 years ago, multi-factor authentication became mandatory, and it caused a lot of problems. Let's say in countries where everything was well connected, and the second factor being your cell phone, or maybe an app that you need to access, or maybe like one of these tokens where you have like a one-time number that is valid for 30 seconds that you have to enter. So there were multiple barriers to it. One of them was lack of user training, where if, let's say, the second factor is not available, what do you do? And very often it had the opposite effect of what was the objective in the beginning, which was to secure access, but it became so secure that even legitimate users could not even access it. So there was an adaptation period, and some additional measures had to be put in place to still safeguard the systems and safeguard the data and make sure that whichever end user is trying to access the system is really that person and really is sanctioned basically to access that sensitive data. But also the lack of training was one of the biggest problems. So I think that in order to balance the additional complexity that is necessary to safeguard these systems needs to come also with training, proper training. Also, when it comes to the deployment in difficult environments, where connectivity is an issue, where maybe the second factor is reliant on connectivity. Then something that we had to learn also the hard way, and that is very applicable in the case of Primero, is there should be a fallback in the case the second factor is not available. And there should be also a very easy way to change it so that you can fall back to something that is a little bit simpler in situations where it is crucial that you have access to the system. And the likelihood that someone is trying to impersonate you is much, much lower. So finding the right balance is challenging, but at least we have these tools available. And I think that it comes also with a significant amount of user-centered design. It means like from the beginning, when it comes to the design the system and the implementation, to make sure that this multi-factor is adapted to local context, paired also with planned training and regular training, so that the end user doesn't get locked out when they are actually legitimate and they're just operating in a difficult environment.
I remember when this new policy happened in UNICEF, how frustrated I was with trying to make it work. And I imagined that same policy being applied across all the Primero implementations, and it would have been a disaster. You know, people locked out of their accounts. So this is where we need inputs from the field, and we need that linkage to the field. This is where the child protection work and the technology work mix together, and it's uncomfortable for some of us that aren't familiar with how these things work, but we need to understand the field reality so that we can plan these things. And that relies on our frontline, our community, our coordinators, and people like yourselves. I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has a burning question, we have one in the back here, please, Mohan. Oh, okay.
I'm I'm the Chief of the officer from Vietnam UNICEF. I have a lot of questions, but I think that you have only give me one, right?
You can have one.
So I think that in Vietnam we very look for applying Primero, and today we have government partners that go with us here, and but in Vietnam we also have some constraints, and one point is that in Vietnam the government required to all system, national system should be protect the citizen data and should be stored locally. So I think that for Primero, I think that it helps to do such a modality, right?
I think I'll field this one. Yeah, this is something that you know, is not unique to one country. It's one of the first questions that we have when we work with governments. So in almost every place we work, the government has some legislation or some requirement about data residency. We call it different things: data residency, data sovereignty, but it's one of the very first things that we hear about. And we have a solution for this. We call it Tier 4. It's a service package that allows Primero to be installed locally, but remains connected to the software as a service offering. So you have the best version of Primero all the time. And we have a lot of expertise in the room today, a lot of people that are working with this model. So I'm going to let you learn from all of them. And over the next 2 days, especially, we're going to have examples of this. You're going to see how different countries are using this approach. And we're going to be very honest about the requirements for that, because it takes a lot of planning and it takes a lot of dedicated effort to make that model work. But I'm glad that you asked the question, and I'm glad that your colleagues are here from the government. This is great news. We are almost at the hour, but we have a few more minutes. There was another question back here, so we'll take one more question. If you could direct it at one of the panel members, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I am Kamsai, Child Protection Specialist from Lao Country Office. My question is to Rachel, actually. As you know, we are progressing in child protection system strengthening and also social workforce development. And of course, CPIMS is one of the important components. But my question is that in the context of where the government has very limited capacity, both financially and also human resources and technology, what I mean, from the experience from other countries, what would be a good, how to say, the start to get the government buying in the context of the limitation? And how do we deal with the sensitivity issues? For example, I mean, for the government to open up some statistic to, especially when the government has to share the server with the UNICEF, for example, that is the sensitivity of the government. So how do we deal with this? Thank you.
Thanks, Kamsai. I don't think this is a 1 minute answer. And I think, as Rob said, over the next few days, maybe there's an opportunity to also learn. I think Laos is one of the examples of the countries in the region where we're piloting this vision of the child protection system. So we have a long-term vision, then a plan, and then built into that is CPIMS. So I think one of the reflections from Laos over the next few days might be, to what extent has that helped create space for investment, for resource mobilization? But from your question, there's also a big amount of work to do to get to that point. Some of the arguments or some of the points that are already made, I think, can feed into that discussion. How you show the impact of investment and why CPIMS not only improves the investment you're making in the social service workforce, but for the lead ministry can help to demonstrate to other ministries, including the Ministry of Planning and Finance, why that investment makes sense. So it's kind of this mutually reinforcing piece that the CPIMS brings. I think the other piece that might work for Laos is maybe an inter-country dialogue, where other countries in the region who have progressed with a similar resource limitation can identify how they moved on and why the investment, which, as Rob said, isn't as big as it used to be when we first quoted those figures in the region. They were much, much higher. Now they're much, much lower. So with that smaller investment, how big the impact can be may also help that dialogue as well. And then the final point is maybe to leverage the ASEAN regional framework, the declaration and the regional plan of action, the regional roadmap, and show how that's a key priority action and why that has worked across the region. So some of those things, but it's not, there's no quick, there's no silver bullet, you know, it's a slow incremental engagement of the government to get them on board.
Great. Thank you very much. I will add one final point here because I think it's going to be a recurring theme in the next few days. When you're discussing this with governments and you're looking for options for funding and resourcing, digital public infrastructure is a huge area of growth and investment. In the next few years, there are going to be massive global funds directed at this. And this is obviously not just for Primero. Primero is a component of digital public infrastructure. It can be designed that way, but those funds are now out there. And in your proposals and in your discussions with government, don't hesitate to say that, because that is actually a very positive thing. If you're submitting a proposal, if you're advocating for resourcing to include that, it's a big selling point and will continue to be for the next few years. I just want to thank the panel very much for taking time out of their day to come and to sit up here and take these questions from everyone. Can we have a round of applause for them? Thank you very much. Very great answers. We are going to wrap up our year in review webinar. We've kicked off our global meeting. We have a great group of people here. I'm so happy you could all be here. We're going to take a nice coffee break, get warmed up, and we'll meet back in here at 10:15 for the next sessions. Thanks, everyone.